Hi everybody, and welcome to Confirmation. This is the first of our confirmation videos. I wasn't expecting to do confirmation with video this year. I think many of you probably were not expecting when you were doing confirmation to have it be happening mostly on video, but here we are. This is a weird year and everybody's changing and adapting. Hopefully this will work for us too. Obviously, I would love to be with you all in person. You all are a group, many of you I've known since you were kind of little, and I'm so excited that you are this year's confirmation class. I know that you're in many ways a strong group. You know each other pretty well. Hopefully there'll be a time for us to do some of that being together as well, but this is a good way for us to learn and be safe at the same time. Hopefully, as well as making it happen in a way that's convenient for you, as many of you are doing online school at the same time. So we're going to do a whole series of videos this year for our confirmation lessons, and this is the first one. I'm going to do these in different places around the church and maybe even some out and around. This first one, I'm doing here in my office in front of my bookshelf full of books, because this first study is about books. In fact, it's about the Bible. This is the Bible that I most often use. This is a good place to start. As you can see, it has been well used and well loved and maybe even beaten up a little bit over the years. I have other Bibles too. This is a Bible that I first got when I was just about your age. When I was 14, I got this Bible and had this for many years. Maybe you remember this Bible from helping out with Sunday school, our Spark Story Bible for kids, a little bit more pictures than the other Bible that I'm used to. There's something that all these Bibles have in common. They don't even all have the same words and the same translations. We'll get into that a little bit later, next week in fact. But one of the things these Bibles all have in common is that they're a little bit confusing. And I don't just mean confusing like the stuff that's in it is confusing, although that's probably true too many times. But this is what's confusing about our Bible. It looks like one book, but it isn't. And maybe some of you remember this from fourth grade Bible study with me or Pastor Page. The Bible isn't one book. It's many books. And it's many different kinds of books. In fact, it's 66 different books altogether. The name Bible comes from Greek words ta biblia, and the words ta biblia mean the little scrolls, plural, as in there's more than one of them. So when this was first put together about 400 or 500 years ago, when we first started binding books like this, we put them all together like this, and all of a sudden it became very confusing. Usually the books of the Bible would sit on a shelf or some other storage rack in a temple, and it would be literally the little scrolls. It would be scroll after scroll after scroll after scroll. In fact, some of the books of the Bible, when there's more than one book, say First Kings and Second Kings, the reason they divided them up into first and second is because they were too long to fit on just one scroll. So it's the first scroll of Kings and the second scroll of Kings. But then, and it was very clear then, when you were pulling one book off the shelf, it was much like a bookshelf like this. When I want to go for this author and this book that's about this thing, I'll go to that book. But imagine all of these books, 66 different books, all bound up to look like this. It makes it look like it's one book. And when it looks like it's one book, it seems like it has one author, or the same characters, or the same stories. But in fact, there's 66 different books, as I said, written by different authors in different places over thousands of years, to different people, for different reasons. I've collected a few more books on my table here, books that were usually living on my shelf. In addition to the Bibles, I have books of church history. I have books of poetry. This is a book of Rilke poetry, which is quite lovely. I have a book of sayings from the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. Things like in, out, deep, slow, calm, peace, smile, release, present moment, wonderful moment. Words of wisdom, short sayings. I have hymnals in here. This is one of the hymnals from my church growing up. It was called the Pilgrim Hymnal, way before your time, but it brings me back to some of the old songs of my childhood. I have hymn books in here. I have contemporary magazines, periodicals about things that are happening in the church at the time. This one is actually about Minecraft Catechism. I have no idea what that means. Maybe you would know better. But it's about the things that are happening right now in the church. I have books written by theologians. Theologians are people who professionally think about God and write about God. And this one was someone who was basically a prophet for us. He's someone who knew what Christianity wanted to be, what we said we were, and was challenging us to be everything that we were supposed to be. So we would call this maybe a book of prophecy. I have one of our HR manuals that we are currently reviewing and going through as we review all our policy. It's rules about how to be the church, because it's hard to be an organization, an institution, without rules that keep it all together. And last one, I'm sure you get the point by now, but my last one, I just got a letter from someone here. The reason I say this is that I have all these books in my office, on my shelf, on my desk, and they're all different. And so are the books of the Bible. In the Bible, whichever one of these I pick up, are books of history and prophecy. And there are letters in here, and there are rule books in here, and there are hymnals, and there's poetry, and there's books of or collections of wise sayings. These are many different books, as I said, written over many different years, well, thousands of different years, by many different people, for many different reasons, to many different people who needed to hear different things. In 8th grade, as I think many of you are, you've begun to study genres. And in fact, probably for several years now, you've studied genres, fiction and nonfiction, and you can fill in all the rest. Genre matters, doesn't it? It matters what kind of book a book is trying to be. A math book is really good at being a math book, and also for me, really good at putting me to sleep. But if you ask it to be a book of poetry, it's not going to be good at that, is it? If you take a book of poems, they can be beautiful and inspiring, or funny, witty. But if you ask those to be a science book, poetry will be really bad at science. You get the idea, right? But some of the things that we do with the Bible is, if we expect it all to be one book, then some of the books of the Bible are not going to be really good at what that we ask them to do. If we have different genres in here, books of myths and legends, then that's not going to be very good as a history or as a science book. If we have in here letters, pastoral letters that a pastor wrote to members of a congregation to say, I care about you, this is what I hear you're going through, this is my advice, well, that's wonderful, and it's good for what it is, but it's not going to be very good if we ask it to be a history or a book of theology. Our songs, all of our psalms in here are songs, song lyrics. We don't have any of the music for it anymore, but it's a wonderful thing to have as our history, but we have to let them just be songs. The books of prophecy in here are not books that predict the future necessarily. They are here to make us be who we say we are. So hopefully you get the idea. One of the first things we need to do is realize that when we hold this Bible in our hands, we are holding many different books together. And if we're going to read this well, and most importantly, if we're going to understand what it means, then we need to understand what the different books we're reading are, and where they came from, and what they were meant to be, if we're going to understand what they might mean for us now. Let's talk a little bit about sort of getting around in the Bible. And again, some of you may remember this from 4th grade Bible study, or maybe some of this is vaguely coming back to you because we went through this then a bit, but maybe you haven't practiced it since then. I would understand. If you don't have a Bible, by the way, come by church, make arrangements with your parents to come by. We have lots of Bibles here, and we would love for you to have one. Not this one, but your own. All of the Bibles that I know of right now, they all have a table of contents, something with which you are very familiar at this point. And the table of contents is very important because it will tell you where things are in the book. And when you're trying to navigate 66 different books, that's a very helpful thing. Eventually, you will probably remember some of them are more toward the back and some are more toward the front and some are somewhere in that mass of stuff in the middle. But to start with, a table of contents is the place to start. So each book has a different name. Sometimes it has to do with what was described in the book. Sometimes it's named after who we've traditionally thought the author of the book is. Sometimes when it comes to our letters, it's named after who the audience of the book is. But we'll always, when we say a place to go in the Bible, we say Matthew 5:1. Well, we always start with the name of the book, Matthew, or Romans, or 1 Kings, or Genesis, or Psalms, or 1 John, or Revelation. We'll always start with the name of the book first, and that's where you can go and you'll look it up in your table of contents. That's first. So Matthew 5:1, or 5:30, or 25:13. The numbers that come after then tell you chapter and verse. So Matthew 5:1 says Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. We're going to do a little bit of practicing with that. That will be your homework for this week. When this is sent out, you will have a few verses to look up, about 10 verses or so to look up and to read. But if I were to go to, say, Matthew 5:1, I would look at my table of contents for the New Testament book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. I would search all the way through for it. And then, as you'll see in your Bibles, there are big numbers and little numbers in just about every Bible. The big numbers are the chapters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to sometimes 40 or 50 chapters. And then inside each of those chapters, there are really tiny numbers. Sometimes you really have to look for them. And those tiny numbers are the verse numbers. So the first thing you'll do is I'll go through Matthew and find, okay, I'm in the Gospel of Matthew. And then I'll find my big number 5. You don't have to pause or look at that. Just take my word for it. That's the big number 5. And 5:1 is the verse that comes right after it. And it's when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he began to speak and talk to them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And then he has a very famous Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount that follows. That's also what we would do if I wanted to read a whole section of the Bible. I would say Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 10, or something like that, right? And you'll see that some of your homework verses say that too. So Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 10. So you go to the Gospel of Matthew, you go to the chapter 5, and then your verses, on the tiny numbers, you'll read 1 through 10. There will be a lot more that's coming next week, and in fact, in future weeks, there might be a little more to this. In some ways, we're just getting started, and it's a very simple concept and very simple idea for this week. That is, this book that you hold in your hand, this Bible, is not one book. It's many books. It's Ta Biblia, the little scrolls, all bound together. Many different books by different people at different times, all of which can be helpful to us in different ways if we understand where they came from. We're going to be referring back to that a lot. So for this first week, again, that's where we're going to stick with that navigation. How do you get around in the Bible and find different books when we need them in the future? That'll be our first practicing. So like we do every week, I'm going to ask each of you to send me a paragraph, very simple, 5 to 7 sentences in the paragraph. You can email me, or your parents can email me to say, this is what you heard this week, this was what was important to you. And also, find a few of those verses for practicing your navigating. Send us this will be on our YouTube channel, so you can write things in the comments below if you have questions, or you can email or call or text me. I hope that through this time we're also going to be able to spend a little bit of time on Zoom. I'm sure you all are pretty zoomed out. Even I'm pretty zoomed out. So we're not going to do a lot of that, but if you have specific questions, I'll be there for you. And hopefully we'll be able to meet in person a little bit too, in a very safe and spread out way. Well, thank you for this. If you have any questions, let me know. In the meantime, have a great week, and I'll see you next Monday. Bye-bye.